Did Aleister Crowley interrogate the Nazi warlord and occultist Rudolf Hess in 1941? That's the theme of my book, Aleister Crowley MI6, The Hess Solution. On the 14th of May 1941, Aleister Crowley wrote to naval intelligence the following: "If it is true that Herr Hess is much influenced by astrology and magic, my services might be of use to the department in the case he should not be willing to do what you wish." Crowley's letter was received by Ian Fleming. He was a lieutenant commander in naval intelligence, and he was the deputy to the head of the department. Crowley has lunch with Fleming in a hotel in Mayfair, Cavendish, and Fleming discusses with Crowley his offer. Hess has been a prisoner for about 10 days, ever since he was captured after his disastrous flight to Scotland. He's not saying very much, even though being privy to the innermost secrets of the Nazi high command, he probably knows things like the date of the prospective attack on the Soviet Union. Fleming thinks that Crowley just might be the solution. So he gives Crowley the diary of Hess's principal assistant, Albrecht Haushofer, which gives the background to Hess's flight and also information about the various measures that British intelligence took to lure Hess to Scotland. Haushofer is an intriguing character. He was a Mischling, that means he was part Jewish, and he was a member of the resistance to Hitler. Hess's flight is one of the great mysteries of the 20th century. Why did he just get in a plane and go to the Scotland, to Dungarvel, which was the seat of the Duke of Hamilton? The Duke of Hamilton was the royal steward to George VI, and he knew Churchill. He was well connected, but he wasn't that important. And in fact, he wasn't at home. He was in charge of RAF Turnhouse, now Edinburgh Airport. And when Hess's Messerschmitt flew into the sector, it was identified as hostile, but Hamilton overruled this on the grounds that it wouldn't have sufficient fuel to return to base. And the plane was allowed to fly on, even though Glasgow had suffered devastating bombardment only a few days before. So who was waiting for Hess at Dungarvel? Could it be that it was one of the most illustrious figures in the land, and Hess flew in the belief that he was going to be granted safe passage back to Germany after he'd negotiated the peace terms he was carrying? 1945 finds Crowley in Netherwood. Netherwood is a bohemian boarding house on the ridge in Hastings, run by a very nice couple who loved inviting well-known scientists and writers of the day to participate in their brains trust. Even though Crowley was, by reputation, the wickedest man in the world, they rather took to him and became fond of him. They employed a handyman called Will, and Will is actually intending to become a Catholic priest. So Crowley tutors him in Latin. Crowley has a succession of visitors. There's Lady Frida Harris, who designed his tarot pack and also supported him financially. There's the mystic, Dion Fortune, his future biographer, John Simmons. And there's also a rather mysterious man called Maxwell Knight. Maxwell Knight was the head of a department of MI5 called B5B that was charged with rooting out subversives in the United Kingdom, looking for traitors and spies of the homegrown variety. Knight, intriguingly enough, was also a student of Crowley's in the 1930s. He studied under him with Dennis Wheatley. Wheatley wanted material for his sort of black magic thrillers, but Knight was more seriously on the path. So Knight comes to visit, and so does a couple, a Hungarian professor of quantum physics and his wife and their chauffeur as well. They are in fact Soviet agents. They're on the hunt for the Z file. The Z file is a description of the encounter between Hess and Crowley, which took place in Mitchett Place, known as Camp Z, because Z was the code name given to Hess by British intelligence. Stalin wants the file because he's convinced that British intelligence were mixed up, or in fact orchestrated Hess's flight. Will's the victim of a honey trap, and he feels he has no option but to take the file from Crowley's room, which he has access to because of the tutoring. But he goes to see M, as Maxwell Knight was known, in his headquarters in Dolphin Square. Crowley dies on the 1st of December 1947, and strangely enough, he was very patriotic, or at least purported to be. He wrote patriotic poems during the war, claimed he'd invented the V sign, and he charges Will to find the Z file and publish it to prove he'd done his bit. Will speaks to Maxwell Knight about this. Knight tells him that the Z file is a fake. It's actually written by Ian Fleming. But Will is a bit dubious about this. He also finds out that the file was sent to the United States. It went to Jack Parsons. Now, Jack Parsons is another very intriguing character. He was a rocket scientist, one of the people who were most instrumental in designing the fuels that eventually NASA would use. There's a crater, appropriate enough, on the dark side of the moon, named after him. Jack Parsons was also the head of Crowley's order in California, called the Agape Lodge, which actually moved from Hollywood to Pasadena. Though by 1952, when Will finds himself in California, he's doing national service, working on flying boats, and he's seconded there. Jack Parsons is not sort of still officially the leader of Crowley's order, but he's still very much immersed in the occult with his wife, Marjorie Cameron. Will goes to see them, and it looks like he'll get the Z file, but then the sort of calamity intervenes, and then we move finally to 1965. Will is a musician. He learned guitar as a teenager, and he's working in the music scene. He works for Graham Bond, who's a well-known R&B maestro, who also was born illegitimately in Essex. Found out that in 1937, found out that Crowley had a child in the same county in the same year, and believed that Crowley was his dad. Will is very mixed up in this sort of revolution that's going on in London, and well, mainly in London at that time, the sort of birth of the underground, the psychedelic era, an era, interestingly enough, that Crowley predicted and anticipated way back in the 1940s, and even believed that 1965 would be a key year, or the key year. And actually 65 is called year zero. It's the time where the music made a great leap forward with the Rolling Stones and of course the Beatles. And Will runs into John Lennon and George Harrison in the Ad Lib Club in Soho on their first LSD trip. The next day, a bit worse for wear, he's in Soho and he comes across Maxwell Knight just by chance. This is almost 20 years on. Knight, meanwhile, had gone from being a spy master to a broadcaster on the BBC, because Knight was always a great naturalist. He was famous for walking around Chelsea with his pet bear called Bessie. He kept animals all the time, often in his pockets. And he's beloved throughout the country by kids. He's known as Uncle Max. So Knight invites Will to his house in Camberley, actually for a jam session, because Knight, in his youth, was a jazz player. He played the sax, and he's a great jazz buff. So they sort of have a sort of bit of a jam session. But while Will is in Maxwell Knight's suburban house, he comes across a photo, and the photo opens the floodgates and sort of forces Knight to reveal to him what really happened on the night of the 10th of May, 1941, the night that Hess crashed in Scotland, and also the identities of the reception committee, the people, one of them very, very illustrious, who were waiting for Hess at Dunga Vale. So if you want to find out who they are, and there's quite a lot more in the book to what I've actually been saying. So the book's available from Mandrake, Amazon, or if you follow that link, and it's called Aleister Crowley MI6, the Hess Solution. You can also hear me being interviewed on the Neil Haley Show by Neil Haley and the writer Kim Sorrell. That's from the 6th of September. And you can find a show I did with Deanne Hines called The Music, My Life, in which I discuss the influence of Crowley on music and play tracks by people like David Bowie, Ozzy Osbourne, and Ab Soul. You can find links to all of those on my website, www.richardmcneff.co.uk.